A young man gives his shoes to a shivering old worker, but the next day, he receives an unbelievable offer that changes everything. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The crisp white sneakers felt almost sacred in Miguel Alvarez's hands as he gently placed them in his backpack. 6 months of saving, of taking extra shifts at the warehouse, of skipping lunches and walking instead of taking the bus, all condensed into this one pair of shoes that might just change everything. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of his small apartment, illuminating the sparse furnishings, a worn couch that doubled as his bed, a rickety table with mismatched chairs, and walls adorned with photos of his mother in healthier times. A persistent drip from the kitchen faucet marked time like a metronome. "Today's the day," Miguel whispered to himself, zipping the backpack closed with reverence. The Reynolds Tech interview wasn't just another job opportunity. It was the lifeline his mother desperately needed. 20 minutes later, Miguel stood beside his mother's hospital bed, her once robust frame now diminished against the white sheets. The steady beep of monitoring equipment created a soundtrack to their conversation that he'd grown all too familiar with. "You look handsome, mijo," she said, her voice thin but her eyes bright with pride. "Like your father in that old photo." Miguel smiled, taking her hand. The skin felt like paper beneath his fingers. "I'm going to get this job, Mama. Their benefits start immediately for full-time employees. The experimental treatment—" "Shh," she interrupted, squeezing his hand with what little strength she had. "No promises, just do your best. That's all I've ever asked." "Miguel?" Nurse Chen appeared at the doorway, clipboard in hand and sympathy in her eyes. "May I speak with you for a moment?" In the hallway, she handed him another medical bill, with a growing balance highlighted in angry red. "I'm sorry to add this stress today of all days, but the administration is asking for another payment by next week." "I understand," Miguel nodded, folding the paper carefully and tucking it into his pocket. "After today's interview, things will be different. I promise." "I hope so," Nurse Chen replied, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "The doctor wants to discuss options soon. We have about 2 more weeks before decisions need to be made about continued care." The clinical euphemism hung in the air between them. Options. As if his mother's life could be reduced to a menu of choices, each with its price tag attached. "I'll have good news when I return," Miguel said, more to himself than to the nurse. The subway was packed, bodies pressed against each other in the morning rush. Miguel checked his watch. Still 30 minutes until the interview. He clutched the backpack to his chest, protecting the precious sneakers inside from the jostling crowd. A drop of sweat trickled down his back despite the December chill outside. "Next stop, Central Plaza," the automated voice announced as the train screeched to a halt. Miguel squeezed through the doors, immediately quickening his pace as he emerged onto the street. The Reynolds Tech building towered ahead, its glass exterior reflecting the winter sun like a beacon. 4 blocks to go, and he'd change his shoes at the building's entrance. The crisp white sneakers would complete his outfit, dark slacks and a button-down shirt borrowed from his cousin's husband, both slightly too large, but the best he could manage. As he cut across Central Plaza, the cold air burned his lungs. The weather report had mentioned possible snow later, and the December wind carried that promise with biting conviction. Miguel checked his watch again. 20 minutes to go. Plenty of time to switch his shoes and compose himself. That's when he saw him. An elderly man sat hunched on a bench, his thin frame trembling visibly in the bitter cold. What caught Miguel's attention, however, were the man's feet, bare and exposed to the freezing concrete, the skin raw and cracked with spots of blood staining the ground beneath. Miguel slowed his pace, then stopped altogether. The old man didn't look up, lost in whatever private suffering had brought him to this bench on this cold morning. His hands, covered in age spots and wrapped in tattered gloves with the fingers cut out, clutched a threadbare coat around his shoulders. Miguel checked his watch again. 18 minutes. He glanced toward the Reynolds Tech building, then back at the old man's bleeding feet. "Sir?" Miguel approached cautiously. "Are you all right?" Roomy eyes looked up, momentarily confused before focusing on Miguel's face. "Just resting a bit," the man replied, his voice a dry whisper. "I'll move along shortly." Miguel knelt down, opening his backpack and removing the white sneakers. 6 months of sacrifice held in his hands. "These might help," he said, placing them gently on the ground in front of the old man. "They should keep your feet warm." The elderly man stared at the pristine shoes as if they were artifacts from another world. "I can't accept these," he murmured, his voice trembling like his body. "You clearly need them." Miguel thought of his mother in the hospital bed, of the experimental treatment that might save her, of the interview that was now just 15 minutes away, of what she would do in his position. "My mother always said that kindness is the only luxury we can afford, even when we have nothing," Miguel replied, already backing away. "Please take them." Before the old man could protest further, Miguel helped ease the sneakers onto his raw, cold feet. They fit surprisingly well. The old man's eyes welled with tears as he looked up. "What's your name, son?" "Miguel. Miguel Alvarez." "Thank you, Miguel Alvarez. I'm Joseph Winters." He extended a weathered hand, which Miguel shook gently. "I won't forget this." "Take care, Mr. Winters," Miguel said, glancing at his watch. 12 minutes. With no time to dwell on his decision, Miguel jogged the remaining distance to the Reynolds Tech building, his worn work boots now replaced with only his thin black socks. The cold from the pavement seeped through immediately, each step a shock against his feet, but he pressed on. The lobby of Reynolds Tech was a cathedral to corporate success. Gleaming marble floors, contemporary art on the walls, and a reception desk that looked carved from a single piece of polished obsidian. Miguel approached with as much dignity as a man in socks could muster. Behind the desk sat a young man with perfectly styled hair and a tailored suit that probably cost more than all of Miguel's possessions combined. His gaze dropped immediately to Miguel's feet, one eyebrow arching in disdain. "May I help you?" he asked, the question dripping with judgment. "I have an interview at 9:30, Miguel explained, "with Mr. Reynolds, for the executive assistant position." The receptionist, Marcus according to his nameplate, made a show of consulting his computer screen. "Your name?" "Miguel Alvarez." A smirk played at the corner of Marcus's mouth. "I see." His eyes performed another deliberate scan of Miguel, from his slightly oversized clothes to his sock-clad feet. "Are you aware that Reynolds Tech has a professional dress code?" "Yes, Miguel began, but Marcus cut him off. "Interviews for the janitorial staff are on Thursdays," he said with a dismissive wave. "You seem to have been misinformed." Heat rose to Miguel's face. "I'm here for the executive assistant position," he repeated firmly. "I have a confirmation email." Marcus's smile remained fixed and cold. "Mr. Reynolds doesn't hire people who don't know how to dress appropriately. I'm sure you understand." Before Miguel could protest further, a security guard appeared at his elbow. "Sir, I'll need to escort you out if you don't have a proper appointment." "But I do have an appointment," Miguel insisted, pulling out his phone to show the email. "Look, perhaps you can reschedule when you're more prepared," Marcus suggested with artificial sympathy. "Security will show you out." The walk of shame across the lobby felt endless, the marble floor ice-cold against his socked feet. People in expensive suits stared or pointedly looked away, their discomfort with his presence palpable. Outside the building, the security guard released his arm with a muttered, "Sorry, man," that sounded almost genuine. Miguel stood on the sidewalk, the cold seeping through his socks and the reality of what had just happened crashing down around him. No interview, no job, no medical treatment for his mother. The trip back to the hospital was a blur of numb feet and numbed emotions. When he arrived at his mother's room, she was sleeping, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Miguel sank into the chair beside her bed, taking her fragile hand in his. "I'm sorry, Mama," he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. "I tried." Nurse Chen entered quietly, placing another notice on the growing stack of bills on the bedside table. "We have more 2 weeks before we need to discuss alternative options," she said with forced gentleness, her eyes reflecting the gravity of what those options might entail. Miguel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. When the nurse left, he remained beside his mother, watching her sleep and trying to formulate a new plan. Any plan. Hours later, after returning to his apartment, Miguel opened his nearly empty savings box. The meager contents, less than $100, stared back mockingly. He had sacrificed everything for those sneakers, believing they would be his ticket to saving his mother. He was fishing for loose change under the couch when his phone rang. The hospital. His heart stopped, then raced. Too early for good news, too late for routine updates. "Mr. Alvarez?" The doctor's voice was grave. "Your mother's condition has suddenly deteriorated. We need to start her on a new medication immediately. Without it, I'm afraid she may not survive the week. But I must inform you that this medication isn't covered by her current insurance plan." Miguel closed his eyes, gripping the phone tightly. "How much?" The figure the doctor named consumed all the air in the room. More than his empty savings box. More than he could borrow from friends who were barely making ends meet themselves. "You have 24 hours to make a decision, Mr. Alvarez. I'm sorry." The call ended, leaving Miguel alone in the silence of his apartment, the choice he'd made that morning replaying in his mind like a cruel joke. A pair of shoes for a stranger had cost him the interview that might have saved his mother's life. Miguel's eyes burned from staring at his laptop screen for hours. Another loan application website displayed the same crushing message. "We regret to inform you that your application has been denied." He closed the browser tab, the 12th rejection of the night, and rubbed his face with trembling hands. The clock on his wall read 3:42 a.m. Less than 20 hours remained before the hospital would need payment for his mother's medication. Miguel had called everyone he knew, emptied his meager savings, even considered selling his few possessions of value. Nothing came close to the amount needed. He must have dozed off in his chair, because a sharp knock at the door jolted him awake. Sunlight now streamed through the thin curtains. The clock read 7:30 a.m. "Coming," Miguel called, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. He stumbled to the door, expecting perhaps a neighbor, or maybe even a debt collector. They'd started appearing with increasing frequency. Instead, he found himself face to face with a tall man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. The man's silver-streaked hair was perfectly styled, his shoes gleaming like polished obsidian. He carried himself with the unmistakable confidence of someone accustomed to power. "Miguel Alvarez?" the man asked, his voice carrying the precise diction of someone who knew his words carried weight. "Yes?" Miguel replied cautiously, suddenly conscious of his rumpled clothes and the dark circles surely visible under his eyes. "I'm Thomas Reynolds," the man said, extending his hand. "May I come in?" Miguel froze. Thomas Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Tech, the very man he was supposed to interview with yesterday, was standing at his door. In his apartment building with its peeling paint and security door that hadn't locked properly in years. "Of course," Miguel finally managed, stepping aside. "I'm sorry about the mess. I wasn't expecting—" He trailed off, hastily gathering scattered loan applications from the small dining table. Thomas Reynolds entered, his tall frame making the modest apartment seem even smaller. His eyes scanned the space, not with judgment but with careful observation. "I apologize for arriving unannounced," Reynolds said, declining Miguel's nervous offer to sit on the threadbare couch. "But after what I witnessed yesterday, I felt compelled to speak with you directly." Miguel's heart sank. Had Reynolds come to reprimand him for showing up to an interview in socks? To officially blacklist him from future opportunities? "Mr. Reynolds, about yesterday," Miguel began, but the CEO raised a hand. "Yesterday," Reynolds interrupted, "I was in my car, heading to our downtown office, when I saw something extraordinary in the plaza." His expression softened slightly. "I saw a young man who clearly couldn't afford to be generous give his only decent pair of shoes to a homeless man." Miguel's mouth opened and closed without sound. Reynolds had seen the encounter. "That homeless man," Reynolds continued, his voice taking on an unexpected emotional quality, "was Joseph Winters, my father." The statement hung in the air between them, impossible and yet somehow making perfect sense. "Your father?" Miguel finally managed. Reynolds nodded, moving to the window and looking out at the neighborhood without really seeing it. "We've been estranged for years. After my mother died, he changed, started drinking. I was young, angry, unwilling to understand his grief. By the time I realized my mistake, he had disappeared." He turned back to Miguel. "I've been searching for him for months." "I didn't know," Miguel said softly. "He was just a man with bleeding feet on a cold morning," Reynolds finished for him. "Yes, and you gave him your shoes, shoes you clearly needed for something important." Miguel thought of his mother in the hospital, of the looming deadline, of the experimental treatment that now seemed further away than ever. "I'm sorry about the misunderstanding at reception yesterday," Reynolds said, shifting to a more businesslike tone. "It's unacceptable and will be addressed, but I'm here to offer you the position personally, the executive assistant role, not out of charity," he added quickly, seeing Miguel's expression. "I need people with unshakable character on my team." For a moment, Miguel couldn't speak. The salvation he'd sought had arrived from the most unexpected source. "The position comes with comprehensive health benefits that begin immediately," Reynolds continued, "and I'd like to offer an advance on your first month's salary." He named a figure that made Miguel's knees weak, enough to cover his mother's medication with some left over. "Why?" Miguel asked, unable to process this reversal of fortune. Reynolds smiled slightly. "Let's just say, your mother's philosophy about kindness being a luxury resonated with me. My assistant will email all the paperwork today. Can you start Monday?" 2 hours later, Miguel stood at the hospital pharmacy counter, watching the pharmacist process the payment for his mother's medication. The weight that had been crushing his chest for months eased slightly as the transaction was approved. "This should stabilize her condition," the doctor explained when Miguel delivered the medication. "We'll monitor her closely over the next few days." Miguel nodded, relief washing over him as he watched the nurse add the new medication to his mother's IV. He held his mother's hand, whispering to her sleeping form about the miracle that had occurred, but the doctor's expression remained grave. "Mr. Alvarez, there's something else we need to discuss." He guided Miguel to the corridor. "The new images we took this morning show the underlying condition has progressed faster than we anticipated." Miguel's momentary relief evaporated. "What does that mean?" "It means that while this medication will help for now, your mother will need surgery within 2 weeks, not the month or two we originally estimated." "Surgery?" Miguel echoed, his mind racing to calculate costs he knew would be astronomical. "It's the only option if we want to address the root cause," the doctor confirmed. "I'll have my office provide the details, but you should know, even with insurance, the copay will be substantial." Later that evening, Miguel found himself in a small but elegant restaurant, watching as Thomas Reynolds embraced his father for what appeared to be the first time in decades. The older man, now clean-shaven and dressed in new clothes, looked transformed from the shivering figure on the bench. "I never thought I'd see the day," Joseph Winters said, his voice stronger than when Miguel had first heard it. "My Thomas, running a company. Your mother would be so proud." Reynolds' expression contained a complex mixture of emotions: joy, regret, lingering traces of old pain. "I should have found you sooner," he said. "All these years wasted." "Not wasted," the older man corrected gently. "Just part of the journey." As the evening progressed, Miguel found himself increasingly distracted by the news of his mother's needed surgery. The joy of securing the medication money had been so quickly overshadowed by this new, larger obstacle. His new salary, while generous, wouldn't accumulate fast enough to cover the surgical costs within 2 weeks. As the dinner wound down, Mr. Winters approached Miguel, taking his hands in a firm grip. His eyes were clear now. The confusion Miguel had witnessed on the bench replaced with sharp awareness. "You saved my life twice," he said quietly. "Once with shoes, and again by reuniting me with my son." "I just did what anyone would do," Miguel replied uncomfortably. "No," Mr. Winters shook his head. "Most would have walked past. I was invisible to them, but not to you." He squeezed Miguel's hands once more before releasing them. "Thank you." The night air was crisp as Miguel walked the 6 blocks from the restaurant to his apartment building. The stress of the past 24 hours, combined with his sleepless night, left him bone-weary. All he wanted was to collapse into bed and process the day's events. But as he approached his apartment door, he noticed it was slightly ajar. A cold dread settled in his stomach as he pushed it open. The apartment had been ransacked. The few drawers had been emptied onto the floor, his mattress upended, and the small lockbox where he kept emergency cash had been pried open. The laptop Reynolds had provided him earlier that day, containing notes about his new position and ideas he'd been excitedly jotting down, was gone. Miguel stood in the center of the chaos, too exhausted to even feel proper anger. He called the police, filed a report, and spent the next 2 hours trying to restore some order to his home. As morning light began filtering through his window, Miguel arrived at the hospital for his daily visit, before heading to Reynolds Tech for his first official day. But as he approached his mother's room, he noticed a different doctor checking her chart, a stranger instead of Dr. Patel, who had been overseeing her care. "Excuse me," Miguel said. "I'm looking for Dr. Patel." The new doctor looked up. "Dr. Patel was unexpectedly transferred to our sister hospital across town yesterday afternoon. I'm Dr. Ramirez. I'll be taking over your mother's care." "Transferred? But he's been treating my mother for months. He understands her case." "I've reviewed her complete file," Dr. Ramirez assured him, "and I've consulted with Dr. Patel by phone. I understand the urgency of her situation." But Miguel could only hear the universe laughing at him, giving with one hand while taking with the other. New job, new theft, new medication, new doctor. For every step forward, 2 steps back. He collapsed into a chair beside his mother's bed, watching her breathe, each rise and fall of her chest, both a relief and a reminder of how precarious her situation remained. He had no idea how to secure funds for her surgery, how to replace his stolen laptop before his new job noticed its absence, or how to face the mounting challenges that seemed determined to crush him. Sitting in that sterile hospital room, Miguel was urgently called to Thomas Reynolds' office, not knowing if he was about to receive more bad news or if something worse was yet to come. Miguel's steps echoed through the polished marble corridor of Reynolds Technologies as he made his way to Thomas Reynolds' office. Despite the plush carpet runner along the hallway's center, his footsteps felt heavy, weighed down by the accumulated stress of the past 24 hours. The theft of his laptop, the sudden change in his mother's medical team, and now this unexpected summons. His mind raced with possibilities, few of them good. Reynolds' assistant, a woman with a kind smile but efficient demeanor, nodded as he approached. "He's waiting for you, Mr. Alvarez. Go right in." Thomas Reynolds stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, silhouetted against the morning sun. The sprawling city lay below, buildings catching the light like gemstones. He turned as Miguel entered, and to Miguel's surprise, he was smiling. "Miguel, excellent timing. I wanted to discuss something with you." Reynolds gestured to a leather portfolio on his desk. "I'm impressed with your preliminary ideas for our healthcare assistance program." Miguel stared at the folder in confusion. "Sir?" "These concepts for expanding employee benefits to include family members with serious medical conditions. Brilliant work." Reynolds opened the portfolio, revealing several neatly printed pages of bullet points and diagrams. "Your personal experience clearly informed these proposals. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking I was hoping for when I hired you." Miguel approached the desk slowly, scanning the documents. They outlined exactly the type of program that could help his mother: comprehensive coverage for experimental treatments, minimal paperwork, accelerated approval processes. But he had never created these documents. "Mr. Reynolds," Miguel said carefully, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. My laptop was stolen yesterday during the break-in at my apartment. I haven't had the chance to submit any proposals." Reynolds' brow furrowed. "That's odd. I received this document by email from your company address last night, around 11. That's impossible. I was at the hospital until 9, then dealing with the police after discovering the break-in. I haven't even been issued my company email yet." Reynolds pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages before turning the screen toward Miguel. There it was, an email from M. Alvarez Reynolds Tech. "Com," sent at 10:47 p.m., with the attachment, "Healthcare Initiative, your proposal PDF." "Someone else sent this," Miguel stated, the realization dawning on him. "Someone who stole my laptop and somehow accessed the company system." Reynolds' expression hardened. "This is concerning on multiple levels, not just the theft, but potentially a security breach." He pressed the intercom. "Diane, please have IT security join us immediately and locate Marcus from reception. I want him here within 5 minutes." As they waited, Miguel reviewed the proposal more thoroughly. "These are my ideas, though. Notes I'd jotted down yesterday after you hired me. I was brainstorming ways the company could help employees with family medical emergencies. And yet someone else submitted them as their own work," Reynolds concluded, his tone now ice-cold. "Its security arrived first, a woman with cropped silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She listened to the situation, then immediately began typing on her tablet. The email was sent from inside the building," she reported moments later. "Terminal 347, located in the main reception area." The door opened again, and Marcus from reception entered. The same receptionist who had humiliated Miguel the previous day now stood with perfect posture, his expression neutral and professional. His eyes widened slightly upon seeing Miguel, but quickly returned to their composed state. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Reynolds?" His voice betrayed no emotion. "Marcus, are you familiar with Miguel Alvarez?" Reynolds asked, his tone deliberately casual. "We met briefly yesterday morning, sir. Mr. Alvarez had an appointment that was rescheduled." "Rescheduled? Is that how you characterize having security escort a qualified candidate out of the building because of his footwear?" Color drained from Marcus's face. "Sir, We'll address that issue separately," Reynolds interrupted. "Right now, I'm more concerned about this." He gestured to the documents. "Do you recognize this proposal?" Marcus's eyes flicked to the papers, then away too quickly. "I don't believe so, sir." "Interesting," Reynolds said, "because our security logs show it was sent from your terminal last night. Care to explain how Mr. Alvarez's ideas ended up in this document, submitted from your computer, under his newly created email account that he hasn't even been given access to yet?" The silence in the room was absolute. Miguel watched as Marcus's carefully constructed facade began to crumble around the edges. "I saw his notes," Marcus finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "When he left them at reception during the misunderstanding yesterday, I thought if I presented them as mine, as his, I mean, that it would show initiative, that you might notice my potential." Reynolds' expression was unreadable. "Wait outside, please. IT, verify whether Marcus has access to any other secure systems. And investigate how a company email was created without proper authorization." After they left, Reynolds turned to Miguel. "I apologize for this violation. It seems I need to address multiple issues in my organization." He paused, studying Miguel thoughtfully. "The irony is that your ideas are genuinely exceptional. Would you be interested in developing this healthcare program for real, as its director?" Miguel blinked in surprise. "Director? But I was hired as an assistant. I hire people based on their capabilities, not just their resumes. This experience with your mother has given you insights that no MBA could provide. The position would come with a significant salary increase, of course." Hope flickered in Miguel's chest. A higher salary might make his mother's surgery possible sooner. But before he could respond, his phone vibrated with an incoming call from the hospital. "Excuse me, I need to take this," he said, stepping away from the desk. The new doctor's voice was clinical but carried an undertone of urgency. "Mr. Alvarez, we've received the results from this morning's tests. Your mother's condition has deteriorated significantly. We need to move up the timeline for surgery." "Move it up? But you said 2 weeks. That was before these latest results. We now need to perform the procedure within 3 days, or the success rate drops dramatically." The floor seemed to shift beneath Miguel's feet. 3 days. But the cost, I can't possibly arrange the funds that quickly. "I understand your concern," the doctor replied, his voice softening slightly. "But medically speaking, waiting is not an option if we want the best outcome." After ending the call, Miguel returned to Reynolds, explaining the situation with a voice he barely recognized as his own. "Take whatever time you need with your mother," Reynolds said immediately. "The position will be here, and accept this as your first official project. Develop this healthcare program as you envision it. Perhaps we can implement it quickly enough to help your mother." Later that evening, Miguel sat in his hastily cleaned apartment, working on a borrowed company laptop. The walls of his small home seemed to close in as he typed frantically, developing the healthcare program from his original notes, expanding the concepts into a comprehensive plan that could revolutionize how the company supported employees during medical crises. Sleep was a distant memory as dawn approached. Miguel had been awake for nearly 48 hours straight, fueled by desperation and the faintest glimmer of hope. If he could finalize the program proposal, if Reynolds could fast-track its implementation, if the board would approve the necessary funding, so many ifs stood between his mother and the surgery she urgently needed. When he arrived at the hospital the next morning, his eyes were bloodshot, his movements mechanical. He had pushed himself beyond exhaustion, working through the night on the proposal, while researching alternative funding options for his mother's surgery. "You need to rest," Nurse Chen scolded gently when she found him slumped in the chair beside his mother's bed, the borrowed laptop still open on his knees. "You can't help her if you collapse yourself." "I just need to finish this," Miguel mumbled, forcing his eyes to focus on the screen. It's her only chance. By the third day, Miguel had completed the comprehensive proposal, incorporating research on similar programs at other companies and statistical analyses, demonstrating the potential benefits to both employees and the company's bottom line. He had submitted it to Reynolds and was now waiting anxiously for feedback, knowing that time was running out. He had barely slept 3 hours in the past 72. As he sat beside his mother, holding her hand and watching her labored breathing, the room began to swim before his eyes. The steady beep of the heart monitor seemed to come from far away, the fluorescent lights overhead pulsing strangely. Mr. Alvarez? Mr. Alvarez! Nurse Chen's voice sounded distant and echoing. The last thing Miguel remembered was the cold hospital floor rushing up to meet him, and then darkness. He awoke disoriented, gradually becoming aware that he was lying in a hospital bed. For a moment, panic seized him. His mother, the proposal, the deadline. But a familiar voice cut through his confusion. "Easy there, son. You're all right." Mr. Winters sat in a chair beside the bed, his weathered face creased with concern. Thomas Reynolds stood nearby, talking quietly with a doctor. "What happened?" Miguel asked, his voice hoarse. "You're working yourself to death," Mr. Winters said plainly. "Collapsed from exhaustion." Thomas approached the bed, his expression a mixture of concern and something else. Respect, perhaps. "The doctor says you haven't been sleeping or eating properly. That stops now." "My mother," Miguel began, trying to sit up, "is being operated on right now," Mr. Winters completed, placing a gentle hand on Miguel's shoulder to keep him from rising. Miguel stared in disbelief. "What? How?" "Thomas advanced the funds from the new program so she could be the first beneficiary," Mr. Winters explained, a note of pride in his voice as he glanced at his son. Miguel turned to Thomas, overwhelmed. "I can't thank you enough. I'll pay back every cent." "It's not charity," Thomas interrupted firmly. "It's the purpose of the program you created. The board approved it this morning on an emergency basis. Your mother's case was the perfect test implementation." Miguel closed his eyes, relief washing over him in waves. After days of desperate work, of watching every plan crumble and every hope flicker, something had finally gone right. Hours later, when Miguel was finally allowed to see his mother after the surgery, she looked pale, but was smiling weakly. The doctor had reported that the procedure had gone well, though she would need close monitoring during her recovery. "They told me what you did, mijo," she whispered, her voice fragile but her eyes bright with pride. "Creating a program that will help so many people. I always knew you would make a difference." Miguel held her hand carefully, mindful of the IV. "Rest now, Mama. Everything's going to be okay." As the words left his mouth, the heart monitor beside the bed suddenly erupted in a series of sharp, urgent beeps. His mother's eyes widened, her hand clutching his with sudden strength before going limp. Medical staff rushed into the room, voices calling out in urgent tones as Miguel was pushed backward toward the door. "She's coding," someone shouted. "Beginning CPR. Get the crash cart in here." Miguel watched in horror through the doorway as his mother went into cardiac arrest, the medical team working frantically to save her life. The rhythmic cadence of the hospital machines filled the corridor as Miguel watched the medical team work frantically around his mother's bed. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into an eternity as he pressed his palms against the cold glass of the observation window. A nurse had gently but firmly guided him outside, her words lost in the fog of his panic. "Clear!" a doctor called, and Miguel winced as his mother's body jerked upward with the defibrillator's shock. Once, twice, 3 times. The monitor continued its angry, insistent alarm. Flat line. Then, miraculously, a blip. Another. The chaotic rhythm of a heart struggling to remember its purpose. "We've got her back," someone announced, and Miguel's knees nearly buckled with relief. The next hour passed in a blur as his mother was stabilized and moved to the intensive care unit. Miguel followed the gurney like a man sleepwalking, barely registering the concerned glances from Thomas and Mr. Winters, who had appeared at some point during the emergency. The chief surgeon finally approached, his face grave beneath his surgical cap. "Mr. Alvarez," he began, his voice carrying the careful neutrality doctors develop when delivering difficult news. The surgery itself was successful, but there were complications we didn't anticipate. "What kind of complications?" Miguel asked, his voice barely audible. "Post-operative cardiac arrest, as you witnessed. We've stabilized her for now, but there's been damage to her heart, The surgeon paused, choosing his words carefully. She needs additional specialized treatment, a procedure that exceeds our capabilities here. Miguel felt as though he was sinking into quicksand. I don't understand. You're a top hospital. For general and many specialized surgeries, yes. But your mother's condition requires a cardiothoracic specialist with experience in her specific complication, along with equipment we simply don't have here. Thomas stepped forward. What exactly do you need, doctor? Perhaps we can arrange a transfer to another facility. The surgeon shook his head. The nearest facility with the necessary specialist is in Boston. The cost of emergency medical transport alone would be... He named a figure that made Miguel's blood run cold. The surgery itself would cost nearly triple what the first procedure had. Even with his new position, even with the healthcare program, this new obstacle seemed insurmountable. How long do we have to decide? Miguel asked, already knowing the answer. Her condition is stable but precarious. I'd recommend making arrangements within 48 hours. Beyond that, the odds begin to decline significantly. After the surgeon left, Miguel found himself wandering the hospital corridors in a daze. His feet carried him to the small chapel near the ICU, a simple room with wooden pews and stained glass that cast colored shadows across the floor. He collapsed onto a bench, burying his face in his hands. The silence enveloped him like a shroud. His mother had always been religious, finding comfort in prayer when times were difficult. Miguel had drifted away from those beliefs as he grew older, but now, in this sterile hospital with its machinery and protocols that had failed to keep his mother safe, he found himself wishing he still had faith to fall back on. I gave everything I had, he whispered to the empty room. It wasn't enough. Faith is a funny thing, said a voice behind him, startling Miguel from his thoughts. Mr. Winters slid into the pew beside him, his movements stiff but deliberate. Never believed in it myself until I was barefoot in that plaza. Miguel glanced at him sideways, too exhausted for surprise at his presence. I don't know what to believe anymore. People think kindness is giving away what you can spare, Mr. Winters said, his weathered hands clasped loosely in his lap. True kindness is giving away what you cannot afford to lose. I've done that, Miguel replied, a bitter edge to his voice. And look where it's gotten me. My mother is dying because I can't afford to save her. Mr. Winters nodded slowly. Yes, and yet, here I am, sitting beside the young man who gave away his only decent shoes. Here my son is, outside in the hallway, making phone calls to try to help a woman he's never met because her son showed kindness to a stranger. He paused. Your actions created ripples you never could have predicted. Miguel wanted to find comfort in the old man's words, but the reality of his mother's situation weighed too heavily. Ripples won't pay for a specialist in medical transport. Perhaps not directly, Mr. Winters conceded, but don't underestimate the power of the currents you've set in motion. The chapel door opened, and Thomas entered with purposeful strides. His usual composed demeanor had given way to an energy that seemed almost frenetic. His eyes were bright, a stark contrast to the exhaustion etched across his features. I've been making calls, he announced without preamble. I've spoken with doctors in Switzerland. They're sending the specialist by plane. He arrives in 4 hours. Miguel stared at him, uncomprehending. Switzerland? But the cost is being covered, Thomas cut in. Consider it the first major investment of the new healthcare initiative. That's impossible, Miguel protested. The board wouldn't approve something this expensive for a single case. The board didn't approve it, Thomas said simply. I did. As CEO, I have discretionary funds for pilot programs. This qualifies. Miguel looked between Thomas and Mr. Winters, searching for some sign that this was a cruel joke or a misunderstanding. Why would you do this? You barely know us. Let's discuss it while we wait, Thomas replied, checking his watch. We should head to the helipad. The specialist will be arriving by helicopter from the airport. The next 12 hours unfolded like a surreal dream. Miguel watched as his mother was prepared for another surgery, this time led by Dr. Kessler, a renowned cardiothoracic specialist who had been halfway across the world just a day earlier. The surgeon's team moved with the practiced precision of people accustomed to performing medical miracles, bringing with them equipment that had to be specially transported alongside them. In the waiting room, Miguel sat between Thomas and Mr. Winters, the three men forming an unlikely vigil. As hour 8 of the surgery approached, Miguel's exhaustion finally overtook his anxiety enough to ask the question that had been burning in his mind. "How did you find this doctor so quickly?" Thomas, who had been staring into his 5th cup of coffee, looked up with tired eyes. "Through contacts I made years ago when I was searching for treatment options for my own father." Mr. Winters reached over and placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a gesture that spoke volumes about the reconciliation still unfolding between them. "After my mother died," Thomas continued, "my father's health declined rapidly. Heart problems, exacerbated by grief and alcohol. I was young, angry, focused on building my company. By the time I realized how serious his condition had become, we needed specialized intervention." "I didn't make it easy," Mr. Winters added softly. "I refused treatment, pushed everyone away. I researched specialists around the world," Thomas said. "Dr. Kessler was one of them. He couldn't help then. My father disappeared before we could arrange it, but we stayed in contact. He's consulted on several medical technology projects for Reynolds Tech since then." Miguel absorbed this information slowly. "But why do all this for us? The expense, the favors called in, the risk to your company's resources?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some distant point. "Because," he finally said, his voice hesitant, "when I saw you give your shoes to my father, I realized I've spent years building a revolutionary technology company but forgot to revolutionize what truly matters, how we care for each other." He set down his coffee cup with a decisive movement. "I've made money, lots of it. Created innovations, won awards, been featured on magazine covers. None of it filled the emptiness left by my broken family, by the knowledge that I was too caught up in success to help the people who needed me most." "You found him eventually," Miguel offered. "Too late to prevent years of suffering," Thomas replied. "But perhaps not too late to change how this story ends." He looked directly at Miguel. "What you did, that simple act of giving, it made me question everything about the legacy I'm building." The conversation lapsed into silence as fatigue eventually claimed them all. Miguel drifted in and out of consciousness in the uncomfortable waiting room chair, startling awake whenever a hospital staff member passed through the doors. Finally, as dawn broke outside the windows, Dr. Kessler emerged, still in his surgical gown. The exhaustion on his face gave way to a small, satisfied smile as he approached them. "The procedure was successful," he announced. "We've repaired the damage and implemented a new tissue regeneration technique that should prevent similar complications in the future. She's a fighter, your mother." Tears of relief streamed down Miguel's face as he thanked the doctor, unable to fully articulate his gratitude. "She'll need to remain here for at least 2 weeks of recovery," Dr. Kessler continued, "then ongoing treatment for several months. But I expect a full recovery, given time and proper care." As they were finally allowed to see his mother in the recovery room, Miguel stood at the threshold, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them here. She lay peaceful now, the crisis averted, her breathing steady and unassisted. "I will never be able to repay you for this," Miguel said softly to Thomas and Mr. Winters as they stood beside him. "Faith is a funny thing," Mr. Winters repeated his words from the chapel. "Never believed in it until I was barefoot in that plaza." Mr. Winters sat beside Miguel in the chapel, his weathered face softened by the colored light filtering through the stained glass windows. The small space carried an atmosphere of timeless quiet, insulated from the urgent beeps and hushed conversations of the hospital corridors outside. "I gave everything I had," Miguel whispered, his voice breaking as he stared at his hands. "It wasn't enough." Mr. Winters nodded thoughtfully, seeming to weigh each word before he spoke. "People think kindness is giving away what you can spare," he said, his voice carrying the gentle rasp of age and experience. "True kindness is giving away what you cannot afford to lose." Miguel looked up, a flicker of frustration crossing his exhausted face. "I've done that," he replied, unable to keep the bitterness from his tone. "And look where it's gotten me. My mother is dying because I can't afford to save her." "Yes," Mr. Winters acknowledged, not attempting to soften the harsh reality. "And yet here I am, sitting beside the young man who gave away his only decent shoes. Here my son is, outside in the hallway, making phone calls to try to help a woman he's never met because her son showed kindness to a stranger." He paused, his eyes drifting to the simple wooden cross at the front of the chapel. "Your actions created ripples you never could have predicted." Miguel wanted to find comfort in the old man's wisdom, but the weight of his mother's condition pressed down too heavily. "Ripples won't pay for a specialist in medical transport." "Perhaps not directly," Mr. Winters conceded, "but don't underestimate the power of the currents you've set in motion." The chapel door opened suddenly, and Thomas entered with purposeful strides. His usual composed demeanor had given way to an energy that seemed almost frenetic. His tie was loosened, hair slightly disheveled, but his eyes were bright with purpose. "I've been making calls," he announced without preamble. "I've spoken with doctors in Switzerland. They're sending the specialist by plane. He arrives in 4 hours." Miguel stared at him, struggling to process the words. Switzerland? But the cost is being covered. Thomas cut in, his tone brooking no argument. "Consider it the first major investment of the new healthcare initiative." "That's impossible," Miguel protested, rising from the pew. "The board wouldn't approve something this expensive for a single case." "The board didn't approve it," Thomas said simply. "I did. As CEO, I have discretionary funds for pilot programs. This qualifies." Miguel looked between Thomas and Mr. Winters, searching for some sign that this was a cruel joke or a misunderstanding. "Why would you do this? You barely know us." "Let's discuss it while we wait," Thomas replied, checking his watch. "We should head to the helipad. The specialist will be arriving by helicopter from the airport." The next hour was a blur of activity as Miguel's mother was prepared for transport to the hospital's helipad. Medical staff moved with practiced efficiency, explaining the process to Miguel in gentle but factual terms. Thomas made calls continuously, coordinating between the Swiss medical team and the hospital administration, smoothing bureaucratic obstacles with the authority his position commanded. On the hospital roof, Miguel stood with his arms wrapped around himself against the chill wind, watching the distant lights of an approaching helicopter. The rhythmic thump of its blades grew steadily louder, cutting through the night air with mechanical precision. "That's them," Thomas said, stepping up beside Miguel. The helicopter touched down with a gentle bounce, its rotors slowing but not stopping completely, a sign they intended to depart quickly. The side door slid open, and a team of 3 medical professionals emerged, ducking under the still-spinning blades. They moved with the coordinated precision of people accustomed to emergency situations, pulling equipment cases behind them. The lead physician, a tall man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, approached Thomas with quick strides, shaking his hand firmly. "Dr. Kessler," Thomas greeted him. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Reynolds," the doctor nodded. "It's been too long." His accent was slight but noticeable, his English precise. He turned to Miguel. "You must be Ms. Alvarez's son. I've reviewed her case en route. Complex but not hopeless. Not at all." Miguel managed a nod, overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the situation. A world-renowned specialist flown in overnight, speaking about his mother's case with such casual confidence. "We should proceed immediately," Dr. Kessler continued. "Time is essential with cardiac complications." The following hours blended together as Miguel's mother was prepped for surgery. Dr. Kessler explained the procedure with diagrams sketched on a hospital notepad, his precise movements conveying both expertise and compassion. "The damage to the heart tissue is repairable," he explained, "but we'll use a new regenerative approach that has shown excellent results in similar cases. Your mother is fortunate. The initial surgery was well performed, which gives us a good foundation." In the waiting room, Miguel sat between Thomas and Mr. Winters as the surgery began. As the clock ticked past hour 1, then 2, the initial adrenaline faded, leaving him hollow with exhaustion. Mr. Winters produced a thermos of coffee from a small bag he'd brought. "Hospital coffee is terrible," he explained, pouring 3 cups. "Some things never change, no matter how fancy the hospital." Thomas accepted the cup with a small smile. "You always did make the best coffee." "Your mother taught me," Mr. Winters replied softly. "Said I was hopeless in the kitchen otherwise." Miguel watched this small exchange, glimpsing the decades of shared history between father and son, both the warmth of old memories and the shadow of years lost. As they approached hour 8 of the surgery, Miguel's exhaustion finally overcame his anxiety enough to ask the question that had been burning in his mind. "How did you find this doctor so quickly?" Thomas, who had been staring into his 5th cup of coffee, looked up with tired eyes. "Through contacts I made years ago when I was searching for treatment options for my own father." Mr. Winters reached over and placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a gesture that spoke volumes about the reconciliation still unfolding between them. "After my mother died," Thomas continued, "my father's health declined rapidly. Heart problems, exacerbated by grief and alcohol. I was young, angry, focused on building my company. By the time I realized how serious his condition had become, we needed specialized intervention. I didn't make it easy," Mr. Winters added softly. "I refused treatment, pushed everyone away. I researched specialists around the world," Thomas said, his gaze distant with memory. "Dr. Kessler was one of them. He couldn't help then. My father disappeared before we could arrange it. But we stayed in contact. He's consulted on several medical technology projects for Reynolds Tech since then." Miguel absorbed this information slowly, the parallels between their stories not lost on him. "But why do all this for us? The expense, the favors called in, the risk to your company's resources." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some distant point. "Because," he finally said, his voice hesitant, "when I saw you give your shoes to my father, I realized I've spent years building a revolutionary technology company, but forgot to revolutionize what truly matters, how we care for each other." He set down his coffee cup with a decisive movement. "I've made money, lots of it, created innovations, won awards, been featured on magazine covers. None of it filled the emptiness left by my broken family, by the knowledge that I was too caught up in success to help the people who needed me most." "You found him eventually," Miguel offered. "Too late to prevent years of suffering," Thomas replied. "But perhaps not too late to change how this story ends." He looked directly at Miguel. "What you did, that simple act of giving, it made me question everything about the legacy I'm building." The conversation lapsed into silence as fatigue eventually claimed them all. Miguel drifted in and out of consciousness in the uncomfortable waiting room chair, startling awake whenever hospital staff passed through the doors. During one of these waking moments, he found Mr. Winters watching him with clear, kind eyes. "I was homeless for 3 years," the older man said quietly, continuing as if they'd been in the middle of a conversation. After I left Thomas and his sister with their aunt, I just fell apart. Odd jobs, drinking, moving from city to city. The shame kept me from reaching out even when I got sober. Miguel nodded, understanding the confession for the gift it was, a sharing of vulnerability to ease his own. When you put those shoes on my feet, Mr. Winters continued, it was the first time in years someone had looked at me and seen a person worth helping. Not a problem, not a burden, just a human being having a hard time. His voice grew thick with emotion. You didn't know it, but you gave me back my dignity that day. Before Miguel could respond, the surgery doors opened, and Dr. Kessler emerged, still in his surgical gown. 12 hours had passed since he'd begun. The exhaustion on his face gave way to a small, satisfied smile as he approached them. The procedure was successful, he announced, removing his surgical cap. We've repaired the damage and implemented the tissue regeneration technique. The results are very promising. She's a fighter, your mother. Tears of relief streamed down Miguel's face as he thanked the doctor repeatedly, unable to fully articulate his gratitude. She'll need to remain here for at least 2 weeks of recovery, Dr. Kessler continued, then ongoing treatment for several months. But I expect a full recovery, given time and proper care. Later, as they were finally allowed to see his mother in the recovery room, Miguel stood at the threshold, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them here. She looked peaceful now, the crisis averted, her breathing steady and unassisted. I will never be able to repay you for this, Miguel said softly to Thomas and Mr. Winters as they stood beside him. Faith is a funny thing, Mr. Winters repeated his words from the chapel. Never believed in it until I was barefoot in that plaza. As they watched the steady rise and fall of his mother's chest, the first rays of morning sun streamed through the window, casting the room in a gentle golden light. Thomas placed a hand on Miguel's shoulder. Miguel, he said quietly, I think it's time we talked about the foundation. 3 days after the successful surgery, Miguel found himself in the hospital cafeteria, bleary-eyed but hopeful. His mother's condition had stabilized, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic about her recovery. Thomas had arranged for a private room with extra amenities, brushing aside Miguel's protests with a simple, "It's covered under the new program." Thomas approached with 2 coffee cups, sliding one across the table to Miguel before sitting down. Beside him was a leather portfolio emblazoned with Reynolds Tech in subtle silver lettering. But what caught Miguel's attention was the name handwritten beneath it. Alvarez Reynolds Foundation. I wanted to discuss something with you, Thomas said, opening the portfolio. I'd like to transform your healthcare program into something bigger, a foundation dedicated to helping people like your mother. Miguel stared at the portfolio, momentarily speechless. A foundation? Your program draft was impressive, but it got me thinking, Thomas continued. Why limit this to Reynolds Tech employees? The need is much greater. Miguel took a sip of coffee, buying time to process what he was hearing. This is unexpected. Look at the name, Thomas said, his finger tapping the leather. Alvarez Reynolds. Your story inspired this, Miguel. Your compassion, your determination. I want your name on it because it represents the heart of what we're building. My name alongside yours? Miguel shook his head in disbelief. I don't deserve that kind of recognition. I'm just someone who gave away his only decent pair of shoes to help a stranger, Thomas interrupted. Who created an innovative healthcare model while his mother was critically ill. Who showed more integrity and vision in a crisis than most executives I know demonstrate in their entire careers. Miguel ran his fingers along the embossed lettering, a strange mixture of pride and unworthiness washing over him. What exactly are you proposing? A non-profit foundation that provides critical medical assistance to those who fall through the cracks of the healthcare system. Initially funded by Reynolds Tech, but eventually supported by multiple corporate partners and private donors. Thomas withdrew several documents from the portfolio. "I've had my team draft some preliminary paperwork." As Miguel scanned the documents, his eyes widened at the numbers. The initial investment from Reynolds Tech alone was substantial, enough to help hundreds of families like his. "This is significant," he managed, the magnitude of the proposal overwhelming him. "It's just the beginning," Thomas replied. "I want you to lead this, Miguel, as the Foundation's director." The following day, Miguel found himself in a Reynolds Tech conference room, presenting his expanded vision for the Foundation to a room full of executives. The original healthcare program he'd drafted had been a seed, but now it had grown into something far more ambitious: a comprehensive system to identify critical medical needs, expedite treatment approvals, and manage costs through partnerships with healthcare providers. The Foundation would operate in 3 tiers, Miguel explained, pointing to the display screen behind him: immediate crisis intervention, ongoing treatment support, and preventative care initiatives. Several executives exchanged skeptical glances. A woman in a charcoal suit leaned forward, her expression calculating. "This represents a significant financial commitment," she observed. "What's the return on investment for Reynolds Tech?" Before Miguel could answer, Thomas rose from his seat at the head of the table. "Not every initiative needs to justify itself with quarterly returns, Victoria." "With all due respect, Thomas, the board will ask these questions," she countered. "Some things are worth more than profits," Thomas replied, an edge to his voice that silenced further objections. "But if you need figures, consider this: employee retention, company reputation, tax benefits, and the development of medical technologies that could eventually become profitable ventures for our healthcare division." After the meeting, Miguel walked with Thomas through the company's expansive atrium, still processing the reality that was rapidly taking shape around him. "They'll come around," Thomas assured him. "Some faster than others, but they will." "It's happening so quickly," Miguel admitted. "A week ago, I was desperate for a job interview. Now I'm directing a foundation." "Life changes in an instant," Thomas replied. "Sometimes for the worse, sometimes for the better." That evening, Miguel visited his mother, who was now sitting up in bed and able to hold brief conversations before tiring. Her complexion had improved markedly, the sickly pallor replaced by a hint of her natural color. "A foundation?" she repeated after Miguel shared the news. "With your name on it?" Miguel nodded, still slightly uncomfortable with the prominence. "It seems excessive." His mother reached for his hand, her grip weak but present. "You always said that kindness generates kindness," she reminded him. "This is proof." "I just want to help people who are in the situation we were in," Miguel said. "No one should have to choose between treatment and survival." "My son, the foundation director," his mother said with quiet pride, her eyes drifting closed as fatigue overtook her. "I always knew you would make a difference." As days turned into weeks, Miguel divided his time between the hospital and the small office space Thomas had allocated for the Foundation's initial operations. A team of 4 had been assembled: 2 from Reynolds Tech's HR department, a healthcare administrator recruited from a major hospital, and Miguel himself. Late one evening, as Miguel reviewed application protocols for potential aid recipients, Thomas entered the office with a cardboard box. "Found something I thought you should see," he said, placing the box carefully on Miguel's desk. Inside was a collection of old photographs, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. Thomas extracted one and handed it to Miguel. It showed a younger Thomas, perhaps 12 years old, standing beside a woman with his same piercing eyes. "My mother," Thomas explained quietly. "This was a year before she became ill." Miguel studied the photograph, seeing the clear resemblance between them. "She was beautiful. She was a teacher," Thomas continued, sitting on the edge of the desk. "Believed education was the way out of poverty. When she got sick, we had no insurance. My father's construction business had failed the year before. Thomas pulled out another photo, his mother in a hospital bed, noticeably thinner, Thomas sitting beside her with a forced smile. "She died because we couldn't afford the treatment," he said simply. "My father never recovered from the guilt. Started drinking, lost jobs, eventually disappeared entirely. I was sent to live with my aunt." "I'm so sorry," Miguel said, the parallels to his own situation painfully clear. "I built Reynolds Tech with one goal initially, to make enough money that no one in my family would ever lack for medical care again." Thomas gave a hollow laugh. "Ironic that I achieved that goal too late to help the person who needed it most." "But you found your father eventually," Miguel offered. "Too late to prevent years of suffering," Thomas replied, "but not too late to change what happens next." He carefully returned the photos to the box. "That's why this foundation matters to me, Miguel. It's personal." The following day, Miguel visited Mr. Winters at his new apartment, a modest but comfortable place Thomas had helped secure near his own home. The older man had transformed the small living room into an impromptu workspace, with stacks of papers on a folding table. "Volunteer work," Mr. Winters explained when Miguel inquired, "helping review applications for the foundation." Thomas thought, "I might have useful perspective." Miguel picked up one of the applications, a handwritten letter from a mother whose child needed specialized surgery. "You're good at this," Miguel observed, noting Mr. Winters' organized system for prioritizing cases. "Spent enough time on the other side," Mr. Winters replied with a shrug. "I know what desperation looks like on paper." Later that week, Miguel watched as his mother took her first steps since the surgery, supported by a physical therapist on one side and Miguel on the other. The hallway outside her room seemed endless from her perspective, but she moved forward with determination, her breathing carefully measured. "You're doing wonderfully, Mrs. Alvarez," the therapist encouraged. "Just a few more steps." "I'm slowing down your busy schedule," his mother said to Miguel between carefully measured breaths. "You should be at your new office." "Nothing's more important than this," Miguel assured her, supporting her weight as she took another tentative step. Returning to the foundation office that evening, Miguel found the lights still on despite the late hour. Inside, Marcus, the receptionist who had humiliated him and later stolen his ideas, was emptying trash bins, his head down. "Marcus?" Miguel asked, surprised. The young man straightened abruptly, nearly dropping the trash bag. "Mr. Alvarez, I thought everyone had left for the day." The tension between them was palpable, memories of their previous encounters hanging in the air. "Thomas mentioned you'd been reassigned," Miguel said carefully. "After what happened, it seemed best," Marcus replied, his earlier arrogance replaced by subdued embarrassment. "I'm helping with administrative tasks until HR determines a permanent position." Miguel studied the man who had caused him such trouble. Marcus looked smaller somehow, diminished by circumstances and consequences. His pristine appearance remained, but there was a defeated slump to his shoulders. "How are you finding it?" Miguel asked, setting his bag on a nearby desk. "Honestly?" Marcus glanced up, then away. "It's humiliating, but deserved." Miguel considered this admission, remembering his mother's words about kindness, remembering what it felt like to be desperate enough to risk everything. "The foundation will need an administrative coordinator as we grow," he found himself saying. "Someone detail-oriented who understands both Reynolds Tech systems and our mission." Marcus froze, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Are you suggesting—" "Everyone deserves a second chance," Miguel said simply, not fully understanding his own impulse to offer this opportunity, but feeling it was somehow right. "I've received mine. Perhaps this could be yours." After a tense conversation, Miguel offered Marcus a position in the Foundation's administration. Everyone deserves a second chance, without imagining that this decision would bring consequences that would test the principles of the Foundation itself. 6 weeks had passed since Miguel's mother's successful surgery, and the Alvarez Reynolds Foundation had grown from a concept to a functioning organization with remarkable speed. What had begun in a small office with 4 people had expanded to occupy an entire floor of the Reynolds Tech Building with a staff of 15 and growing. Applications for medical assistance arrived daily, each representing a family in crisis, and already the foundation had helped 27 cases reach successful resolution. Miguel stood by the window of his new office, watching the city below as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the buildings. The view still felt surreal, a tangible symbol of how drastically his life had changed in mere weeks, from a desperate job seeker to the director of a multi-million-dollar foundation. A knock on his doorframe interrupted his thoughts. "The finance reports you requested, sir," Marcus said, entering with a neatly organized folder. Miguel still found it strange to be addressed as sir by the same person who had once dismissed him so contemptuously. But Marcus had proven himself indispensable over the past weeks, throwing himself into the foundation's work with unexpected dedication. His organizational skills and attention to detail had streamlined their developing systems, and his familiarity with Reynolds Tech's corporate structure had helped navigate numerous bureaucratic hurdles. "Thank you, Marcus. And please, I've asked you to call me Miguel." "Of course," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "Old habits." As Miguel reviewed the reports, a puzzling discrepancy caught his eye, a variance in the funds allocated for medical equipment purchases versus the actual expenditures. It was subtle, easily missed in the flurry of numbers, but his mother's years of insistence on carefully balancing even their modest household accounts had made him meticulous with finances. "These numbers don't quite add up," Miguel noted, pointing to the relevant section. "Can you ask accounting to verify these equipment purchases? There seems to be about $8,000 unaccounted for." "Certainly," Marcus replied promptly. "I'll have it on your desk first thing tomorrow." Later that evening, Miguel visited his mother at home. After weeks in the hospital, she had finally been discharged 3 days earlier. Thomas had arranged for her apartment to be renovated during her stay. Improved accessibility features, new furniture, better lighting, and a medical alert system. Though she had initially protested such generosity, her objections had softened when Thomas insisted it was a company pilot program for patient home transitions. "Mijo!" she called out as he entered, her voice stronger than it had been in months. She sat in a comfortable armchair by the window, a crochet project in her lap. "You're just in time for dinner." Miguel leaned down to kiss her cheek, noting with relief the healthy color that had returned to her face. "You shouldn't be cooking yet, Mama. The doctor said—" "Bah! I supervised while Senior Winters cooked," she corrected, gesturing toward the kitchen where Mr. Winters was indeed stirring something that smelled delicious. "He is teaching me his famous chicken soup recipe." Mr. Winters appeared in the doorway, wooden spoon in hand. "Secret ingredient is saffron," he said with a wink, "and patience." The domestic scene struck Miguel with unexpected emotion. His mother alive and recovering. This kind man who had entered their lives through such strange circumstances now cooking in their kitchen. The path that had led here was improbable, painful, beautiful. After dinner, Mr. Winters presented Miguel's mother with a special gift, a custom wheelchair that unfolded into a sleek, lightweight design. "For the days when walking is too much," he explained as she examined it with interest, "but designed to not look institutional." "It's beautiful," she marveled, running her hand along the polished frame. "But surely too expensive." "Thomas insisted," Mr. Winters said with a gentle smile. "Said it's the least he could do for the mother of the foundation's director." The following morning, Miguel met with the foundation's accountants to discuss the financial discrepancies he'd noticed. What had seemed like a minor bookkeeping error was revealing itself as something more concerning, a pattern of small amounts being diverted from various equipment allocations, always just below the threshold that would trigger automatic auditing protocols. It's been happening for at least 4 weeks, the head accountant explained, pointing to highlighted entries in the spreadsheet. Small enough to fly under the radar individually, but collectively significant. Thomas arrived midway through the meeting, his expression grave as he absorbed the information. "This is embezzlement," he stated flatly. "We need to identify the responsible party immediately and press charges. The Foundation cannot afford even a hint of financial impropriety at this stage." Miguel nodded, the weight of the situation settling uncomfortably on his shoulders. "I'll review the authorization logs personally. Only 3 people have approval authority for these transactions." Later that afternoon, the evidence became clear and deeply troubling. The diverted funds had all been processed through Marcus's login credentials, using his authorization codes. Thomas was unequivocal when Miguel shared the findings. "Fire him immediately. We'll file criminal charges first thing tomorrow." Miguel sat at his desk long after Thomas had left, staring at the printouts that detailed Marcus's apparent theft. The betrayal stung, especially after giving him a second chance. Yet something about the situation nagged at him. What if he's going through something we don't know about? Miguel mused aloud in the empty office. The next day, instead of calling security or the police, Miguel decided to investigate further. He obtained Marcus's home address from HR records and drove there after work. The address led to a modest apartment complex in a working-class neighborhood, far from the gleaming high-rises of downtown. As Miguel approached the building, he noticed Marcus helping a young woman in a wheelchair navigate the entrance ramp. The woman, perhaps 19 or 20, bore a striking resemblance to Marcus, the same high cheekbones and dark eyes. She was laughing at something he said, her movements suggesting some form of neurological disorder. Miguel waited until they had entered the building before following. When he knocked on the apartment door, Marcus answered with a look of absolute shock. "Mr. Alvarez, Miguel, what are you doing here?" Before Miguel could answer, the young woman called from inside. "Marcus, who is it?" "It's someone from work, Sophia," Marcus replied, his composure visibly crumbling. "A surprise visit." Miguel gestured toward the hallway. "Could we talk privately for a moment?" Once outside, Miguel confronted him directly. "The Foundation's funds have been disappearing, Marcus. All trails lead to your authorization codes." Marcus leaned against the wall, shoulders slumping in defeat. "How much do you know?" "I know $8,000 has been diverted over the past month. What I don't know is why." Marcus closed his eyes, his carefully maintained facade finally crumbling. "Sophia has cerebral palsy. Our parents died 3 years ago. Car accident. I'm her only family." The words tumbled out in a rush. "Her special therapy sessions aren't covered by insurance. The doctor said without them, she'd lose significant motor function within a year." Tears welled in his eyes. "I couldn't let that happen. I tried getting loans, second jobs. Nothing was enough. Then the Foundation started, and suddenly I was handling invoices for medical equipment worth thousands." His voice trailed off. "Why didn't you apply to the Foundation for help?" Miguel asked, frustration mingling with unexpected sympathy. Marcus laughed bitterly. "After what I did with your ideas? After how I treated you at reception? I assumed I'd be the last person approved." Miguel's frustration gave way to comprehension. The desperation that had driven Marcus to theft was the same desperation Miguel had felt watching his mother suffer, the frantic need to save someone you love by any means necessary. The following day, Miguel visited his mother. He found her practicing walking with the aid of a walker, her movements slow but determined. "What troubles you, mijo?" she asked, immediately sensing his preoccupation. "Your eyes are heavy with decisions." Miguel helped her to a chair before explaining the situation with Marcus. "He stole from the Foundation to help his sister. Thomas wants to press charges." His mother considered this, her fingers absently tracing the pattern on her armrest. What do you believe is right? I don't know, Miguel admitted. What he did was wrong, but his reasons... He trailed off. True compassion does not choose who deserves it, she said thoughtfully, while attempting to take steps supported by the walker. It is given freely, especially to those who need it most. Her words stayed with Miguel as he entered the emergency board meeting Thomas had called to address the theft. The conference room was tense. Board members and legal counsel arranged around the long table like a tribunal. We need to make an example, Thomas was saying as Miguel entered. The Foundation's reputation depends on absolute integrity. I'd like to propose an alternative approach, Miguel interrupted, taking his seat at the table. All eyes turned to him as he outlined a different plan. Marcus would repay every cent through a structured restitution program. His sister would receive proper care through the Foundation's official channels, and most controversially, Marcus would be kept on staff under strict supervision. This gives him accountability without destroying his life and his sister's future, Miguel concluded. Thomas's objection was immediate. You're suggesting we reward theft with leniency? What message does that send? That we practice the compassion we preach, Miguel responded quietly. That we understand desperation and offer paths to redemption instead of just punishment. The debate grew heated, with legal counsel warning about precedents and liabilities. But when the discussion reached its peak, Mr. Winters, who had been sitting silently at the far end of the table as a community advisor, finally spoke. It was a pair of shoes and forgiveness that brought us together, he reminded his son gently. Perhaps we should remember what this foundation was built to represent. The press discovered the embezzlement incident the next morning, and Miguel awoke to find journalists camped outside his apartment building. Headlines questioned the integrity of the Alvarez-Reynolds Foundation, with suggestions of financial mismanagement and corruption, a crisis that could destroy everything they had built. Miguel stood at his window, peering through a gap in the curtains at the growing crowd of reporters below. Their cameras were raised like weapons, ready to capture his emergence. Vans with satellite dishes had double-parked along the street, and journalists huddled in small groups, sipping coffee and checking equipment. There's at least a dozen of them now, he said, letting the curtain fall back into place. His phone had been ringing since 6 a.m. when the story first broke. Somewhere in the system, information had leaked about Marcus's embezzlement and Miguel's controversial decision to offer rehabilitation rather than punishment. The headlines ranged from mildly questioning to outright accusatory. Healthcare Foundation harbors thief. Financial scandal rocks Alvarez-Reynolds Foundation. Misplaced compassion or corporate cover-up. A sharp knock at his door made Miguel jump. He approached cautiously, checking the peephole before quickly opening it to admit Thomas, who slipped inside with a grim expression. Behind him came a woman in a crisp suit carrying a leather portfolio, and a man with a tablet who introduced himself as Alan Mercer, head of crisis management at Reynolds Tech. We need to get ahead of this immediately, Alan said without preamble, setting his tablet on Miguel's kitchen table. I've drafted a statement distancing you and the Foundation from Marcus Romano. We emphasize that you discovered the theft, that Reynolds Tech has covered all losses, and that the individual in question has been dealt with appropriately. Miguel glanced at the statement displayed on the tablet. It portrayed Marcus as a manipulative criminal who had betrayed the Foundation's trust and Miguel's personal compassion. It mentioned nothing about Marcus's sister or the circumstances behind his actions. This makes it sound like we fired him and are pursuing criminal charges, Miguel observed. Precisely the impression we want to give. Alan nodded approvingly. The public needs to see swift, decisive action. But that's not what we decided, Miguel countered. Thomas paced the small apartment, his usual composed demeanor strained. Miguel, this is damage control. The Foundation is barely 3 months old. A financial scandal now could destroy everything we've built. By lying about our response? Miguel challenged. By emphasizing the parts that reassure our stakeholders, the woman in the suit interjected smoothly. I'm Caroline Lewis, legal counsel. From a liability perspective, we need to establish clear separation between the Foundation's leadership and any financial impropriety. Miguel's phone rang again, a video call from one of the Foundation's largest donors. Thomas gestured for Miguel to answer, while Alan typed rapidly on his tablet. Put it on speaker, Thomas instructed. The donor, a hedge fund manager with a reputation for philanthropy that balanced his cutthroat business practices, appeared on screen with a thunderous expression. Miguel, what the hell is going on? I've got CNBC calling me about financial irregularities at a foundation with my name listed as a primary supporter. Mr. Kessler, we're handling a contained situation, Miguel began. My board is asking questions I can't answer, Kessler interrupted. I stuck my neck out for this foundation because Reynolds vouched for you personally. Now I'm seeing headlines about embezzlement. It was an isolated incident that I need assurances, concrete ones, or I'm pulling my commitment. Nothing personal, but I can't have my name attached to this kind of mess. After ending the call, Miguel sat heavily on his couch, the weight of the crisis settling on his shoulders. 3 more similar calls followed in quick succession, donors threatening to withdraw support, partners requesting emergency meetings. This is exactly why we need a clear statement immediately, Alan insisted. Every minute we wait, more damage occurs. Miguel's mother called next, her voice concerned as she explained that reporters had gathered outside her apartment building as well. They're asking about you, mijo, about your judgment. I told them my son knows the difference between justice and revenge. Her words strengthened Miguel's resolve. After ending the call, he turned to Thomas and the crisis team. I won't contradict our values for a favorable headline, he stated firmly. The foundation exists to show compassion to people in desperate situations. Marcus was desperate. Before anyone could argue further, Miguel's phone buzzed with a text message from an unfamiliar number. It's Marcus. I'm downstairs in the service entrance. Security let me in. Can we talk? 5 minutes later, Marcus stood in Miguel's living room, looking pale and haunted. His usual impeccable appearance had given way to rumpled clothing and dark circles under his eyes. I saw the news, he said simply. I came to offer my resignation. I'll make a public statement taking full responsibility. That won't solve anything, Miguel replied. It might save the foundation, Marcus countered. That's more important than my career. Thomas studied Marcus with narrowed eyes. You realize the position you've put us in? I do, sir, Marcus nodded, his voice steady despite his obvious distress. That's why I'm here. I'll do whatever is necessary to minimize the damage to the foundation. Miguel exchanged a glance with Thomas before making a decision. We're holding a press conference in 2 hours. I want you there with me. Miguel, Thomas began, alarm evident in his voice. Not to throw him under the bus, Miguel clarified, but to demonstrate that we stand by our principles, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. The next 2 hours passed in a flurry of preparation. While Thomas and the crisis team argued for a conventional damage control approach, Miguel drafted his own remarks with input from Mr. Winters, who had arrived offering quiet support. People forget that redemption is harder than punishment, Mr. Winters observed as they worked. I spent decades punishing myself for mistakes that could have been forgiven. It nearly destroyed me. Before leaving for the press conference, Miguel visited his mother's apartment briefly. She greeted him with a knowing smile, already dressed as if expecting his visit. You look troubled, she observed, gesturing for him to sit beside her. I'm about to make a decision that could either save the foundation or destroy it, Miguel admitted. Thomas thinks I'm being naive. His mother took his hand, her fingers warm and reassuring. Sometimes the right path isn't the easy one, mijo, but you already know that, or you wouldn't be here asking for my blessing. I'm not asking, Miguel began, then stopped, realizing she was right. Go, she said simply. Stand by your choices. I'll be watching. The hotel conference room was packed when Miguel arrived with Thomas, Marcus, and Mr. Winters. Camera flashes erupted as they took their places at the table on the small stage. Alan, the crisis manager, positioned himself at the side, looking apprehensive about the deviation from his carefully crafted plan. Miguel approached the microphone, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. The cameras stopped flashing, creating an expectant silence. "Thank you for coming," Miguel began. "Yesterday, the Alvarez-Reynolds Foundation discovered that an employee had diverted funds intended for medical equipment to pay for his sister's therapy treatments. This employee, Marcus Romano, has admitted full responsibility." The room erupted with questions, but Miguel raised a hand for silence. "What you may not know is that Marcus's sister suffers from cerebral palsy. When their parents died 3 years ago, Marcus became her sole caregiver. The specialized therapy she needs isn't covered by insurance, and without it, her condition would deteriorate rapidly." Cameras clicked rapidly as journalists captured his statement. The question before us was how to respond. The easy path would be public condemnation, termination, criminal charges, the expected corporate response that would protect our reputation. Miguel paused, making eye contact with several reporters. But this foundation wasn't created to do what's easy. It was created to recognize that healthcare decisions often arise from desperate circumstances. An aggressive reporter stood, interrupting. "Are you saying you're excusing theft because you feel sorry for him?" "No," Miguel responded firmly. "Marcus's actions were wrong. He is repaying every cent through a structured restitution program, and his sister is now receiving proper care through the Foundation's official channels, following all established protocols. How can donors trust a foundation that allows thieves to handle their money?" The reporter pressed. Miguel leaned into the microphone, his voice steady. "How can people believe in compassion if we ourselves don't practice it? Marcus made a terrible choice from a place of desperation. Exactly the situation our foundation was created to address. We'd be hypocrites to advocate for compassionate healthcare while showing none ourselves." The questions continued, some hostile, some thoughtful. Halfway through, a commotion at the back of the room drew everyone's attention. A young woman in a wheelchair was being helped through the doors by a hotel staff member. Sophia Romano's entrance created an immediate hush. She navigated her wheelchair toward the stage with determination, despite her evident difficulty controlling her movements. "That's my brother," she announced when she reached the front, her voice clear despite a slight slur. "He's cared for me since our parents died. Gave up his apartment, his social life, his savings to ensure I had what I needed." Her unplanned testimony shifted the energy in the room. As she spoke of Marcus's dedication, of his late-night research into treatment options, of the bureaucratic walls they'd encountered in the healthcare system, the reporters' expressions began to change. When the press conference concluded, Thomas, who had initially remained silent during Miguel's remarks, unexpectedly approached the microphone. "I founded Reynolds Tech on the principle of innovation," he stated. "But true innovation isn't just about technology. It's about reimagining how we approach human problems. This foundation doesn't exist to do what's easy, but what's right." The next morning, Miguel braced himself as the first news reports appeared. To his surprise, many took a nuanced approach, exploring the ethical complexity of the situation rather than simply condemning. Several articles highlighted the Foundation's unusual response as evidence of its genuine commitment to compassion. More encouragingly, some donors reached out to reaffirm their support, impressed by the Foundation's integrity in handling the crisis. "You took a huge risk," Thomas acknowledged as they reviewed the coverage. "I wasn't sure it would pay off." "It wasn't about calculation," Miguel replied. "It was about being true to what we claim to stand for." As the media storm began to settle, Miguel received a mysterious phone call from an unlisted number. The woman on the other end identified herself only as a representative of one of the wealthiest and most influential people in the country, requesting a private meeting to discuss the true potential of the foundation, an encounter that could expand its impact beyond what he had ever imagined. The private dining room of Le Ciel was silent, its doors closed to the usual lunch crowd. Miguel straightened his tie, a gift from Thomas, as he approached the maitre d' standing beside the ornate entrance. "I'm meeting someone," Miguel explained. The maitre d' nodded knowingly. "Ms. Blackwood is expecting you." Miguel was escorted through the empty restaurant, normally bustling with city power players at this hour, to a secluded area in the back. A woman in her early 60s sat alone at a perfectly set table, studying a tablet. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in an elegant twist, and though her clothing appeared simple at first glance, Miguel recognized the subtle hallmarks of bespoke tailoring that suggested extraordinary wealth. She rose as he approached, extending her hand with a confident smile. "Miguel Alvarez, I'm Eleanor Blackwood." Miguel recognized the name immediately. Eleanor Blackwood's investment firm managed over $200 billion in assets, and her personal fortune was estimated to be in the billions. More relevant to their meeting, her foundation was known for large-scale healthcare initiatives across multiple continents. "Thank you for meeting with me, Ms. Blackwood," Miguel replied, shaking her hand. "Eleanor, please, and the pleasure is mine." She gestured for him to sit. "I've had my eye on your foundation since its inception." A waiter appeared silently to pour water and then disappeared, leaving them in complete privacy. "I wasn't aware we were on anyone's radar that early," Miguel admitted. Eleanor's laugh was genuine and warm. "I make it my business to know when something genuinely innovative is happening in philanthropy. Most new foundations are vanity projects or tax shelters wrapped in pretty mission statements." She leaned forward slightly. "Yours is different." "How so?" "Most foundations begin with money-seeking purpose. Yours began with purpose and found money." She took a sip of water. "That distinction matters." As their lunch progressed, Eleanor revealed that she had been watching the foundation's development closely, from its initial healthcare program to its recent handling of the Marcus situation. "The way you managed that crisis convinced me your work deserves support on a national scale," she explained, setting down her fork precisely. "I'm prepared to offer $50 million to expand the Alvarez Reynolds Foundation to 10 additional states within the next 18 months. Miguel nearly choked on his water. $50 million? "With potential for additional funding based on results," Eleanor added casually, as if discussing the weather rather than a life-changing sum. "That's extremely generous," Miguel managed, his mind racing with possibilities. "It's not generosity, it's investment," Eleanor corrected. "Social impact is my business, Mr. Alvarez. I expect returns, not financial ones, but measurable improvements in healthcare access and outcomes." 2 hours later, Miguel sat in his office at the foundation, still processing the morning's conversation. Thomas entered without knocking, his expression a mixture of excitement and concern. "Eleanor Blackwood?" he asked immediately. "What did she want?" Miguel explained the proposal, watching Thomas's expression shift from surprise to calculation. $50 million, Thomas repeated. "That would transform everything we're doing." "Yes, but there are conditions we need to consider carefully," Miguel cautioned. "Her vision differs from ours in subtle but important ways. Such as, she wants metrics-driven case selection, efficiency algorithms to determine which patients receive priority." Miguel frowned. "It makes practical sense, but it feels at odds with our founding principle of helping those who have nowhere else to turn, regardless of their statistical worthiness." That evening, Miguel visited his mother, who now walked with just a cane. Her recovery had exceeded even Dr. Kessler's optimistic projections, and she had begun volunteering at a local community center 3 days a week. $50 million, she marveled when Miguel shared the news. I remember when finding an extra 20 in your father's old jacket felt like winning the lottery. Miguel smiled at the memory. It would allow us to help thousands more people. But something is troubling you, she observed, always perceptive. Miguel explained Eleanor's efficiency-focused approach, the subtle shift it would represent from their original mission. His mother listened thoughtfully, then said, "Never let the size of the opportunity obscure the clarity of the purpose." Miguel nodded, comforted by her straightforward wisdom. That's exactly what I've been trying to articulate. The following evening, Miguel found himself at an elegant restaurant with Eleanor, Thomas, and their respective legal teams. The dinner had been arranged to negotiate the specific terms of the partnership, but the conversation quickly focused on Eleanor's insistence on data-driven case selection. "We need to be strategic about who we can truly help," Eleanor argued, her tone reasonable but unyielding. "Every dollar spent on a case with low probability of success is a dollar not spent on 3 cases with high probability." "I understand the logic," Miguel replied carefully. "But medical cases aren't just statistics. They're people whose lives hang in the balance." "Of course they are," Eleanor acknowledged. "But sentiment won't maximize impact. If we want to help the most people, we need to follow the data." Thomas, who had initially seemed excited by the partnership, now watched the exchange with growing concern. "What about cases like my mother?" Miguel asked. "Multiple complications, uncertain outcomes? Would an algorithm have approved her treatment?" "Probably not," Eleanor admitted. "And that's precisely my point. While your mother's case had a happy ending, we have to consider whether allocating significant resources to complex cases with uncertain outcomes is the best use of limited funds." Miguel felt a chill despite the restaurant's warm atmosphere. "If we start deciding who deserves help based on efficiency metrics, we lose our soul. The foundation was created specifically for those cases that fall through the cracks of traditional systems, cases that might be deemed inefficient, but where a human life hangs in the balance." The dinner concluded with polite but unresolved tension. As they walked to their cars, Thomas placed a hand on Miguel's shoulder. "She makes valid points from a scale perspective," Thomas said quietly. "But I see your concerns too." Later that night, a knock at Miguel's apartment door revealed Mr. Winters, holding a small, worn photo album. "May I come in?" he asked. "Thought you might need some perspective." Inside, Mr. Winters handed the album to Miguel. It contained newspaper clippings, printed emails, and photographs of people Miguel didn't recognize. "What is this?" Miguel asked, turning the pages carefully. "Stories about the foundation," Mr. Winters explained. "People you've helped. I started collecting them after the first success cases. Thought someone should document the human side of what you're building." Miguel examined the album with growing emotion. Each page represented a life changed, a family preserved, the concrete reality behind the foundation's work. "This woman here," Mr. Winters pointed to a photo of a middle-aged woman smiling with her grandchildren. 3 hospitals rejected her for a procedure because statistically, the success rate for someone with her condition and age was only 30%. But we approved her case, Miguel remembered. "And now she's back to caring for her grandchildren while their mother works." Mr. Winters nodded. "Sometimes the biggest impact comes from decisions that seem small." The album strengthened Miguel's resolve. The next morning, he and Thomas worked late into the night, developing a counter-proposal for Eleanor, one that accepted her funding, but maintained the foundation's commitment to considering cases on individual merit rather than just statistical probability. "We're suggesting a dual-track system," Miguel explained to Thomas as they refined the document. "One pathway for high-probability cases that can be approved through more standardized metrics, and another for complex cases that require individual consideration." "Will she accept it?" Thomas wondered. "I don't know," Miguel admitted, "but I'm not willing to compromise on this point. 2 days later, Miguel delivered their counterproposal to Eleanor in her downtown office, a sleek space 53 floors above the city. She read the document methodically, her expression revealing nothing. "This isn't what I proposed," she said finally. "No," Miguel agreed. "It's a compromise that honors your desire for measurable impact while preserving our founding mission." Eleanor studied Miguel with new interest. "Most people say yes immediately when I offer this kind of money." "I imagine they do," Miguel replied, "but this foundation wasn't built on doing what's expected." "No, it was built on a pair of shoes given away at personal cost," Eleanor observed, closing the folder. "Thomas told me the story." She rose and walked to her window, looking out over the city sprawl. "You've given me something to think about, Mr. Alvarez." The following week, Eleanor's team delivered her response to the counterproposal. To Miguel's surprise, she had accepted most of their terms, with only minor modifications to the reporting structure. "She took our counterproposal?" Thomas asked incredulously when Miguel told him the news. "With surprisingly few changes," Miguel confirmed. Her assistant mentioned she was impressed by our conviction. "You certainly aren't what she expected," Thomas laughed. "Most people don't negotiate with Eleanor Blackwood. They just take what she offers." The signing ceremony was scheduled for the following month, a public event that would announce the national expansion of the Alvarez Reynolds Foundation. As cameras flashed and board members applauded, Miguel and Eleanor signed the partnership agreement. As they posed for photographs afterward, Eleanor leaned close to Miguel's ear and whispered something that made him freeze momentarily, a revelation that connected their stories in ways no one could have imagined. "Your mother was my nurse 20 years ago when I had cancer," Eleanor finished whispering to Miguel during the signing ceremony. The words hung in the air between them as flashbulbs continued to pop around them. Miguel maintained his smile for the cameras, but his mind raced with questions. Before he could respond, they were swept into different directions by handlers and assistants, leaving the revelation suspended like a delicate thread connecting their stories. 6 months later, the expansive public plaza where it had all begun buzzed with activity. Workers assembled a stage while volunteers arranged chairs in neat rows. Banners bearing the Alvarez Reynolds Foundation logo fluttered in the spring breeze. What had started with a simple pair of shoes given away on a cold December morning had evolved into a national organization that had already changed hundreds of lives. Miguel walked the perimeter of the plaza with his mother, her steps now confident, with only a cane for support. They paused at the bench where Miguel had first encountered Mr. Winters. A small bronze plaque had been installed there, reading, "Where kindness took its first step." "It seems like another lifetime," Miguel remarked, running his finger along the cool metal of the plaque. His mother nodded, her eyes reflecting memories of hospital rooms and uncertainty. Sometimes the longest journeys begin with the smallest steps. They continued their walk, stopping occasionally to greet Foundation staff setting up for the afternoon's ceremony. The national launch would officially expand their work to 10 new states, with offices opening in Chicago, Atlanta, Denver, and 7 other cities within the month. "I keep expecting to wake up," Miguel admitted, "to find myself back in our old apartment, rushing to that interview." His mother squeezed his arm gently. "This is no dream, mijo. This is what happens when good hearts find each other." A sleek black car pulled up to the edge of the plaza, and Eleanor emerged, followed closely by Thomas and Mr. Winters. They made their way toward Miguel and his mother, a study in contrasts, Eleanor in her impeccable designer suit, Thomas in his customary business attire, and Mr. Winters in a comfortable but dignified blazer that reflected his position as the Foundation's community liaison. Eleanor approached Miguel's mother with unusual warmth, taking both her hands in greeting. "Mrs. Alvarez, it's wonderful to see you looking so well." "Ms. Blackwood," she replied with a smile. "Or should I call you Ellie?" as I did when you were my patient." Miguel watched the exchange with curiosity, still processing the connection between these two women that had remained unrevealed until the signing ceremony. "I never imagined that determined young patient would become Eleanor Blackwood," his mother continued. "You were so focused on your business degree, even from your hospital bed." Eleanor's usually composed expression softened with memory. "You were the only nurse who didn't tell me to rest instead of study. You brought me extra pillows so I could sit up with my textbooks." "I recognized determination when I saw it," Miguel's mother replied simply. As they toured the setup for the ceremony, Miguel finally found a moment alone with his mother. "Why didn't you tell me you knew Eleanor Blackwood?" "I didn't know Eleanor Blackwood," she explained. "I knew a young woman named Ellie, who fought cancer while studying business. The name didn't connect until I saw her photo in the newspaper after your meeting." She paused, her eyes distant with memory. "Life creates circles we cannot see until they close." Miguel now understood the true reason behind Eleanor's interest in the foundation, not just its innovative approach, but a personal connection to its origins, a circle of kindness returning to its source. The ceremony began at precisely noon. Hundreds of guests filled the chairs, with media cameras capturing every moment. The stage, positioned just yards from the bench where everything had started, featured a simple podium and a ceremonial ribbon stretched across the entrance to the Foundation's new national headquarters, a renovated historic building at the plaza's edge. Miguel watched from backstage as Thomas welcomed the assembled crowd. He felt a mixture of pride, disbelief, and humility as he looked out at the gathered faces, donors, medical partners, recipients of the Foundation's help, and curious onlookers drawn by the celebration. "And now," Thomas announced, "I'd like to invite the woman whose recovery inspired this entire foundation, Carmen Alvarez." Miguel's mother walked steadily to the stage, accepting Thomas's helping hand up the short stairs. The crowd applauded as she approached the ceremonial ribbon, large scissors ready for the cutting. "Before we officially open our national headquarters," she said into the microphone, her accent more pronounced with emotion, "I want to thank everyone who believed in my son's vision. What began with an act of kindness has grown into a movement that will help thousands." With a determined snip, she cut the ribbon, while the crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed as confetti drifted down from above. Miguel took the podium next, surveying the gathered crowd. "6 months ago, I stood in this plaza with nothing but hope and a pair of shoes I couldn't afford to give away," he began. "Today, we stand here having helped over 500 families access medical care they desperately needed but couldn't obtain through traditional channels." He outlined the Foundation's achievements and future plans, explaining how the expansion would bring their model of compassionate care to vulnerable populations across the country. None of this would be possible without the vision of Thomas Reynolds, Miguel acknowledged, who saw potential in a simple act of kindness. Thomas joined him at the podium. "The Foundation project serving 5,000 families within the next year," he announced to appreciative murmurs. "But numbers only tell part of the story. Each case represents a human being whose life continues because someone cared enough to help." Marcus took the stage next, now serving as the director of a specialized program for families with children with special needs. His sister Sophia sat in the front row, beaming with pride as he introduced several families who had received assistance. "The Foundation didn't just save my sister's life," Marcus concluded. "It saved mine by showing me that mistakes don't have to define us, that redemption is possible when someone believes in second chances." As the formal program concluded, guests mingled and toured the new headquarters. Miguel found himself momentarily alone, catching his breath after hours of conversations and interviews. "Miguel," Mr. Winters approached, holding a familiar box. "I thought you might like to have these back." He opened the box to reveal the white sneakers, impeccably cleaned and restored. The same ones Miguel had given him that fateful December morning. I had them professionally restored, Mr. Winters explained. They have quite a story to tell. Miguel stared at the shoes, remembering the sacrifice they had represented, the desperate hope he had carried when he purchased them. "Thank you," he said, genuinely touched by the gesture. As he accepted the box, Miguel noticed a young intern hovering nearby, a recent hire who had shown exceptional promise despite his obvious financial struggles. Miguel had noticed his worn shoes earlier that day, the soles nearly separated from the uppers. "Some steps need to keep walking," Miguel said, placing the box in the surprised intern's hands. "These should be about your size." The young man's confusion gave way to gratitude as he understood the gift. "Sir, I can't." "You can," Miguel assured him. "Sometimes the greatest honor we can give to something meaningful is to pass it forward." Later that evening, after the last guests had departed and the cleanup crews had finished their work, Miguel found himself alone in the plaza with Thomas. They sat on the bench where it all began, watching as the city lights came alive around them. "You know what's funny?" Thomas said, breaking their comfortable silence. "I was about to sell the company when I saw you that day. Had 3 offers on the table." "What changed your mind?" Miguel asked. "I realized I was chasing the wrong metrics," Thomas replied. "Stock prices, market share, acquisition offers. None of it filled the emptiness I'd been carrying since losing my family. Seeing you give away those shoes made me question what success actually meant." He gestured toward the new foundation headquarters, its windows still illuminated. "Now I have more purpose than ever." "It's strange how life works," Miguel observed. "If my mother hadn't gotten sick, if I hadn't needed that job interview, if I hadn't crossed this plaza at that exact moment, if I hadn't been stuck in traffic and decided to walk instead of taking a cab," Thomas added. "1,000 coincidences," Miguel nodded. "Or something more," Thomas suggested. "My father would call it providence." They sat in thoughtful silence as the evening deepened around them. Miguel glanced down at his feet, now clad in comfortable but not luxurious shoes, practical footwear for his busy role. "Sometimes," Miguel said, "the right path appears exactly when you're willing to walk barefoot." Thomas smiled at the metaphor. "Speaking of paths, I've been thinking about the Foundation's future. Now that the healthcare initiative is firmly established, I believe it's time we expanded beyond healthcare.